take off my watch lest I succumb to the temptation.
Oh yeah, unless you pull a Bush. Right. Never get invited back onto the podcast ever again. Can you believe that guy? Gets the most successful video in the history of the Green Dragon, and the next thing you know, he assumes he owns the place. Are we live?
Yes.
Oh, we are live. Yeah.
Behind the scenes before we start.
Father James.
Oh,
you're back.
I'm back.
You're back for more.
Not properly dressed, although I'm advertising my alma mater.
You are advertising your alma mater, which has made significant efforts in the last decade to skew closer to its Catholic roots than other Catholic colleges.
Back in the 80s, this was a minor theme of mine. While I was an undergraduate and working for the student newspaper, but even back in the 80s, it was more aware. I thought it was more aware of its Catholic identity than its more famous neighbor across town.
The more famous neighbor being?
Begins with the G.
Begins with a G. Is it George Mason?
Georgetown.
No, Georgetown. Oh, no. I failed the quiz.
Maybe not so famous neighbor.
Yeah. Wow.
This is me.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cheers to cheers to Catholic you.
Hired as a lowly college student, I'd be back in Wyoming. People would ask me, where are you going to college? And I'd say Catholic University of America in DC. And they would say, oh, isn't that also called Georgetown?
Right. Well, I mean, Georgetown is a Jesuit university.
Yes.
And I think it's been 20 years since anyone thought of Jesuit universities as being Catholic.
Well, as I noticed at the time, even back in the 80s, there was a push to remove crucifixes from classrooms at Georgetown because it might be offensive to non-Catholic students. We had plenty of Muslim students at Catholic University.
Right.
And it seemed to me that they were all highly reasonable people who understood that if you make the decision to go to a Catholic institution, you may actually see Catholic things. Imagine that.
Right.
And if you don't want to see Catholic things, you don't go to a Catholic institution. It's reasonable.
Yeah.
I went one step further and suggested that the Muslim students might have felt more comfortable at an institution that was unembarrassed by its religious origins than at an institution that gave the impression of being a trifle apologetic for having roots in something as
scandalous as the cross.
Inclusive Roman Catholicism.
Huh. Yeah. No, it seems at some point a real departure from faith, right? That
it is. Well,
that you don't want it to be shared with people who don't already share it.
So I have to say something medieval. There were rumors about the 13th century Emperor Frederick II, rumors that he was an unbeliever, and historians still fight about the validity of those rumors. But those were the rumors. He had an admiration for aspects of Muslim culture. The Muslims who wrote about him did not have an admiration for him. One of them was very dismissive about his physique in particular. Said he wouldn't have fetched 10 dinars in the Damascus slave market.
Oh, gee.
But
right, a very affordable king's ransom.
He wants to negotiate with us. Can we trust a man who's not faithful to his own religion? That at least was his reputation. Historians argue about that, but there was enough of a reputation that Muslims had picked up on it.
Right.
They didn't like the feel of it. So, yeah, interreligious dialogue, it's an important word. An important concept, particularly embraced following the Second Vatican Council. Interreligious dialogue is a very crucial thing, but it does need to be a dialogue. So you listen, but you also have something to say. Cardinal Walter Casper, who is by no means, by no stretch of the imagination, an ardent traditionalist. Cardinal Walter Casper once said that one of the difficulties with interreligious dialogue today is that the Catholic partner doesn't really show up.
Mm.
The Catholic partner thinks that we shouldn't say anything. We should only listen.
We're only here to listen.
We do have something to say. How we say it, that's another question.
Mm.
But in the end, our model has to be, I'll say Peter, our model has to be the Acts of the Apostles, Peter and Paul. One way or another, we must be, and one way or another, it has to be clear enough that people know what we're saying. One way or another, we speak Jesus Christ and announce him.
Mm.
Different ways to do it. Francis of Assisi famously had his interview with the Sultan Al-Kamil. And Francis, being Francis, he never said a word against anyone.
Mm.
He did not say a word against the Sultan. He did not say a word against the Sultan's Qadis and Imams. He did not say a word against the Prophet. That was on Francis' style. What he did say was, I want to tell you about Jesus Christ.
Mm. And then went on to describe what aspect of the life of Jesus Christ.
The basic charisma is charisma. Well, the charisma is very charismatic. The basic charisma, the death and resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ, and his power to save.
Mm.
The medieval touch, very dramatic. Francis could help being dramatic. Good.
Yeah.
His personality.
Right.
The medieval and dramatic touch was he offered to walk through flame. He also made a challenge for one of the sultans in Imams to do so. The sultan seems to have taken some dark pleasure in the reluctance of any of the Imams to volunteer. It's an interesting man.
Yeah.
Saladin's son. Sultan al-Kamil did not become Christian, but he was impressed enough with Francis to let him visit the holy places.
Mm. And gave him special imperial protection. Is that even the right word?
Good word, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. He and his followers were not to be molested.
Ah.
They would be free to visit the holy places.
Mm. Wow. Speaking of visitors, Father, what has been your attention to and what has been your thoughts on the increased chatter in the last couple of years about extraterrestrials?
Really?
Yeah. Seems to have sort of come back into the conversation, at least in certain pockets of our culture.
It's had ups and downs, hasn't it?
Mm.
You know, I remember as a kid, my mother, who had forbade us in the strictest possible terms, even to ask about watching Jaws.
Mm.
I think one of us dared ask. And she said, as far as I understand, this movie is about a fish that eats people. Why do you want to watch it? So, mother strictly forbade us to watch Jaws, took us to see Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Friends of hers had taken her. She went skeptical, came back. She said this was the greatest movie she had ever seen.
Oh my goodness.
She was a musician.
Uh-huh.
You know, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. How is communication established with the alien visitor?
With the others, yeah.
Through tones, through music. That idea just captivated her.
Uh-huh.
Close Encounters took seriously the idea of how would we communicate with an extraterrestrial visitor? How would we do that? Music was a possibility. Towards the end, you know, the contact was made, the aliens landed, and a group of astronauts were prepared to accompany them. And the movie showed the astronauts receiving a Catholic blessing.
Really?
The movie makers wanted a priest involved. Yeah, there's a certain amount of cultural weight to Catholicism in the 70s that is long gone.
Hmm.
But and their religious advisors said he couldn't give them the last rites because although they're moving into danger, it's not like
They're not going to their immediate death.
to their immediate death. But it was the blessing for pilgrims.
Hmm.
Priest is cassock and surplice, giving really a very beautiful blessing.
Hmm.
So my mother, that, but especially the communication with the musical tones.
Hmm.
I was stunned as a child. Same woman who forbade us
No watching fish eat
no
people.
watching movies about fish eat people. She, of her own volition, took us enthusiastically.
Wow.
Close Encounters, Third Kind. So,
Father, will you just pull your mic just a little bit closer to the edge, just so we pick up your voice?
that was so I've been thinking about that off and on since childhood.
Hmm.
Skip several years into the mid-80s, college years. A friend and I drove we were supposed to go from Cheyenne to Wheatland, visit some people. And we started to discuss, could you baptize E.T? And the discussion got so intense. So we didn't realize what we were doing until we saw the signs for Douglas.
Right.
It was a lively
Right.
discussion.
E.T. made it home before you guys did.
We did. We're going to be late for the event in Wheatland, I guess.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating subject. It's one that's been in the human consciousness in different ways at different times.
Hmm.
A few odd tales in medieval chronicles, for example, about encounters with. There's one story about someone who'd been. The way the chronicler envisioned it was someone. It's as though someone had been on a boat above us, and a ladder had been lowered, and this person climbed down the ladder, and something happened. The ladder was removed. The chronicler was reporting the story secondhand. The version he heard was people tried to talk to him. They couldn't get any communication out of him. And eventually he died. But
And when is this story coming from?
12th century story.
12th century. And this was a boat in the sky.
Yeah, that's how the chronicler.
The sky boat. Yeah.
Yeah, he was receiving it secondhand.
Okay.
So I've never been willing to dismiss all of that out of hand.
Okay.
On the other hand, I've always been skeptical of, again, there have been surges and retreats of interest in this down through the decades.
Yep.
Big interest in the 70s. Someone wrote Chariots of the Gods. That tried to explain many historical episodes in terms of visitors from outer space. That was not persuasive. So I've never dismissed it out of hand. I've never seen what I would consider persuasive evidence of it. Told a friend of mine once, why do they always appear in the middle of the desert? You know, why did they come and say, appear in New Orleans during Mardi Gras?
I don't know.
My friend's instant retort was New Orleans during Mardi Gras. Who could tell?
Yeah, exactly. Right. They probably are there.
Most likely.
Yeah, that's when they stay the longest. Yeah.
Like, we got to stop by this planet on this day.
Yeah. Dude, right. Exactly. Right. You don't even have to dress up. You know, you just walk around. You know? New Orleans during my.
If they talk to you, you just say a few words.
Yeah,
and they're
yeah,
like, "Oh, yeah,
exactly.
he's just drunk.
Yeah, a thick Cajun accent combined with alcohol is not all that different from an alien language. Yeah.
Yeah, I never dismissed it out of hand, but I can't say I'm a believer in it.
Hmm.
But it's interesting. It's interesting hypothetically.
Hmm.
How do we, hence the point of that discussion, could we baptize ET?
Mm.
Turns on, we say the word, we're saved, caro cardo salutis. Saint Irenaeus of Lyon, the flesh is the hinge of salvation. We are saved by the eternal word of God becoming flesh.
Mm.
Now, and this is my friend's debate, the debate between us. When we say the word became flesh, it's very specifically human flesh, our flesh, Homo sapiens flesh.
Mm.
Now, does that mean that he is the savior for Homo sapiens?
Mm.
Or this is becoming flesh? Because the counter argument to that is this is a cosmic event, the eternal word of God becoming flesh. Is he therefore the savior of every fleshly thing that is capable of salvation and in need of salvation?
Mm-hmm.
So the counter argument.
Right.
So in principle, if ET was rational animal, that's the roots, when I get the core definition of being a human, it's this combination of rationality in the fullest possible sense with physicality in a very complete sense, such that the rationality and the physicality can't really be separated from each other. The So the great scholastics took the Aristotelian matter and form distinction and used that for body and soul. But if ET was rational animal, in that sense, he'd be human in the deep philosophical sense, the deep theological sense. Did he need salvation? That's a question. C.S. Lewis plays with this.
He does in his space trilogy. Yeah.
You could envision an alien race that did not stumble into sin.
But they were not sons of Adam and daughters of Eve.
They're not sons of Adam and daughters of Eve. And that tended to be my position, that the Christian story of salvation is the salvation of the sons of Adam and the daughters of Eve. But my friend's position was the word made flesh.
Right.
It's cosmic.
Uh-huh.
The whole universe is involved in this.
Right. Right.
So if they did fall though, then
If they fell, if they were subject to original sin and highly advanced technology, we'd be in trouble.
yeah.
Right, because they got here first.
Yeah.
Which means they're better at it.
Yeah.
Better at it, but also prey to sin.
Wow.
Yes, that's a scary thought.
Yeah.
And you see that in popular culture, this
Uh-huh.
going back and forth between the virtuous alien and the vicious alien.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the guys I've listened to, and he's on a lot of podcasts, and he's been doing this like UFO things for a while, and he's into other stuff like how we've reverse engineered alien stuff and have been using it.
No.
And a lot of the stuff we see on our planet is actually our stuff, not aliens. And he was saying that so far every alien interaction has been peaceful, but our response to them has been violent.
That could be.
And so it's interesting, but I'm like, he gets on really big shows, and I'm like, it seems like if he was lying all the time, he wouldn't get very far.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
It still falls into this. I do not dismiss it out of hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm older than you gentlemen, so I've seen these surges of interest and these recessions of interest
Hmm.
What they all seem, they seem to have in common is there's some weird things,
Mhm.
and some weird things seem to point in that direction, but never anything that you would call conclusive.
Yeah.
So at some point you ask, why this cat and mouse?
Hmm.
How much sense does the cat and mouse make? Uh, it is true. It is true that if you had alien intelligence really examining us, they'd probably conclude that we're pretty dangerous.
To ourselves as well as anyone else.
You know, that go back to
Yeah.
that 12th century story, actually. One thing the chronicler talked about, and it's really gruesome thing to say, but they were trying the being, according to the story, right? Chronicler is operating at second hand.
Hmm.
Was
The chronicler is just recording the fact that this story exists, and
exactly.
this is what people kind of say.
That's right. Heard this story.
Yeah.
And all sorts of stories in these chronicles.
Hmm.
So, it'd be grossly irresponsible to take anything you find in an old chronicle at face value. There's one I found. This is Gerald of Wales, who was not a 12th century lightweight. But Gerald of Wales writing about Ireland. And if you were English Norman Welsh in the 12th century, Ireland was the Wild West.
Hmm.
And you expect weird things to happen in Ireland.
Mhm.
And it's a story in Gerald of Wales. Again, not a cultural lightweight. But he writes a story about an Irish bishop who had to deal with a case of could a werewolf receive the sacraments? So it would be very foolish to take these things entirely at face value.
Hmm.
I brought that up to say that it's not a completely modern theme,
Hmm.
uh, for what it's worth.
Hmm.
What's telling about that, what's depressing about that 12th century tale is, it was like he was, again, it was as if he were on a boat above us. A ladder was lowered. He came down the ladder. Something happened. The boat went away. He was stuck with us. He seemed to have a hard time breathing, but then adjusted, it seemed, and was able to breathe. Because the chronicler told the tale, the people were trying to communicate with him. He seemed to be kind of human-like,
Hmm.
basically human-like. He wasn't cooperating, so they decided to see if torture could help loosen his tongue. So
Wow.
yeah, for what it's worth, that's the story. Alien intelligence looking at us, they might think, "Oh my,
Yeah.
They're nasty.
these creatures can be nasty."
Hmm.
Well, that's one of the things. His name's Dr. Stephen Greer, and he was saying that they have come down before and turned off our nuclear silos when we've gotten too close to pushing the button.
I don't know.
Which is really weird, but he said the argument they had was not only for our own safety, but when we set off nukes, it messes with their space travel because it messes with space time. That's his claim.
Hmm.
Well,
But
like I
I
say,
don't know. Yeah,
I
it's interesting.
am essentially a skeptic.
Yeah.
However, I'm an interested skeptic.
Why do you think people have a fascination with this? I mean, just taking a step kind of to a higher level, like human beings
Yeah.
are always interested in who
We are,
else
we
might be sharing the space.
We are. You go back to, again, medieval things. You go back to the medieval bestiaries,
Hmm.
and envisioning what sort of other weird human beings might live in places where we couldn't live.
Hmm.
Some theorists, they understood. Everyone with education understood the world was round.
Hmm.
The theorists, until the Portuguese proved this wrong definitively,
Uh-huh.
but many theorized that the equatorial belt was too hot for human survival.
Hmm.
So they would wonder about what beings lived in the Antipodes on the other side of the equatorial belt that they thought we could never visit.
Ah. A classic case of if current trends continue, the sea will be boiling if we sail farther south.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Portuguese, of course, proved that wrong in the
Sure.
course of the 15th century as they made their way down the coast of Africa, wondering what's out there.
Mm.
Uh, I think it's one of the most fundamental human instincts. Some people feel it more deeply than others,
Mm.
but I think it's a fundamental human instinct. I don't want to suddenly dash into the theme song for Star Trek, but we want to go where no one's gone before.
Mhm.
We want to see what is out there, and we're intrigued by the idea of something out there visiting us.
Mhm.
Uh,
Do you think it's the same type of fascination that leads people to try to communicate with the dead?
no,
No. Oh,
no,
interesting.
I don't think so because I know people rather sadly who've been caught up with an obsession about that because of losses,
Oh.
people they've lost. That has, I think, more to do with the raw emotion of wanting to overcome the barrier of death.
Uh-huh.
And that's actually a more visceral thing
Oh, interesting.
and more fundamental to us. Uh, I think
The way that death never sits well with us,
death does not sit well with us.
despite our attempts to.
It's an enemy,
Yeah.
but the last enemy to be destroyed
Mm.
is death.
Mm-hmm.
The only scriptural line quoted in the Harry Potter novels.
Right.
It's
Okay.
not identified as St. Paul, but
Mm.
the last enemy to be destroyed is death. So, yeah, that comes from a very deep place,
Okay.
a deep place that can become dark. We want to pierce the barrier of death.
Mm-hmm.
But we, on this side, can't.
Uh-huh.
God sent his son, who died on the cross, rose from the dead. He broke the barrier of death. Then he and his saints, according to his will, they can come to us.
Mm-hmm.
We can't summon them. We can't break through the barrier. We don't have that power.
Mm.
And that angers us. And then sometimes people get desperate.
Uh-huh.
And they fall prey to all sorts of fads and frauds.
Mm.
But no, I think this is a different thing.
Interesting.
Fascination
Wow.
with
I wouldn't have guessed that.
what is out there
Mm.
in more or less the natural order.
Uh-huh.
Are there things that are more or less in the natural order,
Like us.
like us, more or less
Yeah.
different, maybe different powers? This is the mood in which the Irish stories of the Tuatha De Danann developed. Is there fairy in that old sense that Tolkien liked playing with?
Mm.
Fairy in that old sense, it's not trivial like the leprechauns. It's not angelic. It's not demonic.
Mm.
It's in this same natural order, but different from us.
Mm.
So I think
Not easily visible to us.
not easily visible to us,
Right.
and different from us. So I think there's been a fascination in human cultures for a very long time.
Right.
I think it's very natural. What's out there? And does whatever is out there ever visit us?
Mm-hmm.
And alternatively, in different moods, might we visit them?
Mm.
And if we did, what would happen?
Right. Would we come back?
When we come back, what would happen? Again, C.S. Lewis famously plays with that in his space trilogy.
Mm. Yeah. Some of those fairies and elves, that sense, it does show up in the third part of that series, right? In that hideous strength.
Does
They have visions of sort of I think he even uses the term airish spirits, right?
yeah,
Forces of nature that are
exactly.
beyond,
But forces of nature.
yeah, that are not quite rational, but also not simply bestial,
Right.
but they are natural, and they
Natural.
have their ends,
Yes.
which sometimes affect us.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the natural order.
Right.
I think that is the whole question of extraterrestrials fits in that pattern.
Mm.
beings of the natural order,
Mm-hmm.
not angelic, not demonic. Beings of the natural order, but different from us.
Yeah, I was curious because I've seen a few UFOs out here recently.
You have.
When Ben and I were going back and forth to Split Rock every day, we would commonly see these two lights in the sky. They would just be out there and they're very bright and they would move kind of in tandem and then they disappear and then they come back up over here and then they move around. We saw it, I think, 3 or 4 times.
Wow.
And then,
Same time of the day, typically.
yeah, I usually saw them like 4:30 in the afternoon.
Mm.
And it was daylight out, so they were extremely bright to be visible at that time.
Huh.
And they weren't like planes. They didn't fly in a straight line. It wasn't like they were glimmering or anything. It was just very bright. And then the other night over where I live on our second, there was a string of like 20 lights that looked like the lights of a cockpit
Mm.
in a straight line, and they covered the sky, and then they all disappeared at once.
Oh my goodness.
It's so weird.
It's the desert. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
just
And of
was-
course, they're in the desert.
In
Yeah.
the desert, and I was like, are they in the mountains around here? You know, like, are they just deep underground and we don't know they're there?
Mm.
But it just got me curious because I had seen some other,
I'm curious about it.
Yeah.
I'm curious
Like-
about it. As I say,
yeah.
skeptic, but interested skeptic. I'm intrigued.
Did you listen to Tucker Carlson's interview with Joe Rogan?
I did not.
Okay. Because in there, Rogan talks about it, and Tucker Carlson says they're 100% real. And I was shocked. I was like, Tucker Carlson is going, he's saying this on the biggest platform in the world
Mm.
to Rogan, as Tucker Carlson, that these things are real. Now, it was interesting. Tucker took it, he thought of them as supernatural. He wasn't really convinced
Like-
that they are,
like angels.
Yeah, like
Or
angels.
demons or.
That's not.
which
or
I didn't
uncommitted.
really take because I'm like, a lot of these things are like spacecraft things. Like the most famous one is from the USS Nimitz in 2004 when
That is interesting.
the Tic Tacs were shooting up and down
Oh,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the sky. There were
That is
like 10
interesting.
of them.
Mm-hmm.
And the pilots were like, what in the world is this? And then they started doing studies on the rate of acceleration of those things. They would go from like below water to 28,000 feet in, I think, like 30 seconds or less, like 5 seconds.
Yeah, that's.
And they said the G force inside of that capsule would be 1,350 Gs. They said anything inside of that thing would have been crushed. And these things just kept doing it. Like it didn't even bother them. And then I listened to another episode with an admiral, and he had another incident where they were flying planes, and then all these little objects started coming out of nowhere, flying right around the planes, and the pilots were like, "What do we do? We've never been trained for this. We'll face maneuvers." The admiral was like, "I don't know." And then so they land the planes, and then he talks to his staff. He's like, "What do we do?" Like, and they're like, "Well, we'll just pretend it never happened and continue training." Like, why? He's like, because no one can know that we have things in our sky we can't control.
Mm.
So it was more of a political move rather than like trying to find the truth. So it's just so airy, and a lot of these guys are like, we don't know what they are, but we saw something very
Well,
strange.
there's much we don't know,
Mm.
Yeah.
which is why, as I say, I don't dismiss these out of hand.
Yeah.
Not only much that we don't know. Obviously, we know extremely little about the cosmos, heck, that our own solar system.
Mm.
We know extremely little. But our own planet,
Hmm.
particularly the deep oceans. I've heard it said, I wouldn't be in a position to verify this myself, but I've heard it said that we know more about the moon than we know about the deep ocean.
Mm.
Less than 25% has been explored.
So anyway, for me, I see a sharp distinction between discussions that truly supernatural
Mm.
and these sorts of discussions, which I argue are ancient.
Mhm.
We pose the question with more of an awareness of science and technology, obviously, but the examples I mentioned, that, yeah, it's an ancient question. Are there beings of the natural order who share this cosmos with us? Are there intelligent, are there rational animal beings of the natural order, rational animal beings who share this cosmos with us, and maybe even this earth with us, maybe visiting it? And I will say, and I'm starting to repeat myself, but I will say it's an ancient question.
Yeah. Can I tell you one more story that's
Yes, I say,
Okay. I'd love to share the link with you. I saw this one on the History Channel on YouTube.
I'm not sure I believe in extraterrestrials, but I do believe in extraterrestrial stories.
Yeah. Well,
I'm always interested.
this one's a little crazy. But it seems fairly like unbelievable. So there was this admiral in World War II. He was the first man to fly above the North Pole and the first man to fly in Antarctica.
Mm.
And he was commissioned to go down to Antarctica to see what the Nazis were doing down there. And so he goes down the first time, and he goes out on
And he's
this-
flying like a fighter jet or a long
Blue
distance
Jet.
bomber.
Yeah, he was.
Oh, sorry, World War II.
Yeah.
World War
Okay.
II. So
So he's flying a
whatever,
prop plane.
yeah, whatever he had, and he was flying.
Arctic or Antarctic?
So this is the Antarctic.
Huh.
After he had been to the Arctic,
There's
and then
a fair amount of activity around the Arctic. I hadn't heard of any. Not that I'm an expert in that, right? But I hadn't heard
Wow.
of any in the Antarctic.
apparently the Allies heard that Nazis were in Antarctica, and they didn't know why, and they decided to go down there and explore. So he went down there, and he goes out on his first mission, and he's just flying around the ice to see what's over there, and he finds this gigantic hole in the ice, like huge.
Hmm.
And he decides to fly down it. Well, he flies for 3 miles down.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, this is the weirdest thing. So he finds a city down there, very advanced, like extremely advanced. He talks to the people, they let him go peacefully. Then he comes down a second time with a
How
fleet.
do you talk to them?
Apparently, they could communicate with him.
By tones?
I didn't hear that part.
Yeah.
Well, this is like the crux of the story is
Mm.
where he comes back. He goes in with his navy.
Mm.
Then they get chased out of there, and he said they're using things that could fly to the North Pole in minutes. They're so fast. So he gets chased out of there. He goes back home. He tells the government what he found, and like, don't ever tell anybody about this ever. So he never did. The story came up in his diary when after he had died, and his kids found it.
Huh.
So he never spilled the beans. He never said he had been down there. He never said he went on this mission.
Well,
Oh,
one of my, I used to bother friends of mine watching Star Trek episodes. They're all speaking English. How does everything
I know.
in the galaxy speak English? But so yeah, so there are other things there that get my skeptical sense, but the issue of communications does.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to my mother taking us to see Close Encounters, that was an effort, very imaginative effort to grapple with that question.
Mm.
How would we communicate? Going back to that 12th century story, it just struck me for its vividness. Again, chroniclers, always to be taken with a grain of salt. One of the things that struck me was that inability to communicate.
Mm.
And that would be a real thing. How do we, if we did make contact, how do we communicate?
Mm.
If they made contact, how would they communicate?
Right.
Oh, my mother, she loved that idea of tones.
Mm.
Music is communication.
Mm.
Have you seen that movie Arrival?
I'm not.
I'd
No,
enjoy it, Father. Yeah,
it's really good.
Yeah, because the first half of the movie wrestles with this very question, primarily of how do we mean something, and they're doing things that clearly they mean for us to see. I mean, and specifically in the movie, they draw these primarily circular patterns with ink. They clearly mean for us to see them. and they're doing it for us, but we have no idea what it means. How can we figure out
Well,
something of what it means? Yeah.
that's interesting. Let me
Right.
put that on my list.
Yeah, no, I think you'd enjoy
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
It's very intriguing.
That's an intriguing question. Very intriguing question.
Mhm.
To say, again, repeating myself, skeptic, but interested skeptic. Interested. And I do think it has been, the question has been in the human imagination for a long time.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if you've watched those series or seen those things about them discovering old and ancient civilizations with modern technology. Or you seen
Yeah,
them?
it's not my, well, it's reminiscent for back in, going back a few decades, right? That's what I do, go back decades. What was it? Edwin Donegan, Chariots of the Gods. So always finding ancient civilizations. Again, I'd have to see some pretty persuasive archaeological reports.
Mhm.
But having said that, you have to admit that our understanding of human history, let alone human prehistory, let alone the world's prehistory, is very partial.
It is, yeah.
And we have to be prepared to amend it at different times as new evidence comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
very partial.
I was just curious if you had, because they're what they're finding is there was a very, very big flood. And most of these civilizations, the only thing that lasted were their biggest stone structures that withstood it. And it's very interesting because
Like the work of Randall Carlson and some of his
Yeah.
colleagues, yes?
Yep,
Okay.
him and Graham Hancock. And there's a series that they made on Netflix called
Mm.
Ancient Apocalypse.
Hmm.
So they're trying to find what happened, that everything disappeared, except these big structures that are really well built. How do they build them? We don't know. And then how are they so smart to figure all this out? Like the Great Pyramid, they estimate 2 million stones built it, and each stone weighs 2 to 80 tons. And they're like, some of these stones seem like they came from a quarry 400 miles away.
Massive project.
Massive. And they're like, how? And then they're
The
finding,
whole state would have been mobilized to do
Yeah.
it.
Hmm.
Says something about the power of the pharaoh at that time, because they gave up on doing this.
Mhm.
Yeah, Cleopatra was born closer
Much
to
much
the
later. Yeah.
Cleopatra was born closer to the moon landing than she was to the
Pyramids.
construction of the pyramids.
Yeah.
Isn't that wild?
That is
Yeah.
wild. Crazy. Wow.
That's how ancient. That's how ancient they are. Which is an impressive thought in itself.
Hmm.
That's another thing that is common across human cultures. Uh, the notion of a great flood.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Tolkien said he had dreams of that.
Hmm.
And that influenced his tale of Numenor.
Hmm.
That and the old legend of Atlantis. But he said he had dreams of that.
Well, and that's another thing because Plato references Atlantis.
He does.
And then apparently other old scholars in other places like in Africa, people ask about Atlantis and like, oh yeah, this was around early AD. They're like, oh yeah, that was 9,600 years ago. So like, well, that's really interesting because based on what these archaeologists are discussing, they think the flood happened 11,600 years ago,
Hmm.
which is very interesting. And they said it was an extraordinary city, but it sunk. And then this is another, sorry, so many compilations, but just kind of trying to piece it all together. The oldest map we have, I think it was from 1520. And I don't know.
Maps older than that.
I do.
1520 AD.
at least a navigational for like ocean waters.
Oh, yeah, we've got some,
Okay.
but go ahead.
But anyway, apparently this one was this one they made it. They tried to put all together the ones they had, and Antarctica was on there. Even though we didn't discover Antarctica until 1840,
Well,
allegedly.
the,
I don't know.
the idea of a southern continent was firmly in place,
Mm,
even if it was only an imaginative idea.
mm,
As I say, that there is that theoretical argument that the equatorial zone that humans could not survive the equatorial zone. So the idea was there. They expected to find a terra australis,
mm.
Australia. They expected to find a southern land.
But they didn't expect it to be cold again.
They did not expect. No, they did expect to be cold again.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. Educated opinion understood very clearly that the world was spherical,
Okay.
and so they thought that the two spheres paralleled each other.
Okay.
Cold zone, a temperate zone, and on the other end, a cold zone, a temperate zone, and in between the equatorial zone, where they thought that common opinion was that humans could not survive.
It was worse than it actually turned out to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
Common opinion was proved wrong.
Mm.
That age of exploration was, yeah, and it's a bit fashionable now to, and not entirely wrong either, right? It's a bit it's fashionable right now to talk about the damage inflicted on indigenous populations by the wave of European exploration. But having said that, the there is something awe-inspiring about the burst of enthusiasm for finding out what's there. They're prepared for it by all kinds of legends, also some historical accounts, debates about how seriously some stories could be taken. Some people are skeptical about Marco Polo's accounts, for example.
Really? I didn't hear that.
Yes, yeah, these are fantastic. Can this be taken seriously? The Franciscan friars, who not many people know this. Can you imagine this? Franciscan friars in the time of the Mongol Empire into the 13th, early 14th century, traveled all the way from Europe to China and had mission stations in China. At their chapel in Beijing, they had enough converts they could organize a choir. So can you imagine an invitation to Kublai Khan to attend solemn high mass at the chapel in Beijing? And these Franciscan friars would, then the breakup of the Mongol Empire, there was just no way given the conditions of the 14th century, no way that the connection could be maintained, but the traditions were still there. The stories were there. Can these stories be taken seriously? So those of us who are skeptics have to remind ourselves sometimes skeptics get proved wrong.
You say, so in the 13th and 14th century, there were Franciscans in Beijing.
In Beijing.
Goodness gracious. We never hear about this.
No, you don't. And it's well worth studying. It was an epic of missionary work. You can imagine travel by land. The Mongol Empire made it possible. The breakup of the Mongol Empire. Mongol Empire was created by intense nastiness. However,
once established,
but it didn't have the stability of the Roman. So it didn't endure for centuries. And once it broke up, that connection could not be maintained. But the changed circumstances, the end of the 15th century, early 16th century, then Europeans realized we could make these journeys again, find out what's really there. All sorts of stories remained. There was a story, the one was quite, in the course of the 13th century, there was the Norse settlement in Greenland did well enough that a bishopric was established there. then in the course of the 14th century, climate changes, circumstance changes, and and Greenland just
Was abandoned.
contact was lost.
Hmm.
Then in the late 15th century, it becomes possible to reestablish contact.
Mm-hmm.
Norse settlement was gone, but the tradition had remained that there was this land there.
Mm-hmm.
There were even some vague traditions of a land beyond that, which turned out to be right.
Mm-hmm.
North America. Christopher Columbus famously thought that he had entered the East Indies. Yes, educated opinion all knew the world was round. There was a debate about the dimensions of the Earth.
Mm.
Columbus was wrong. He thought the Earth was smaller than it is.
By about half, a third?
By a third.
Okay.
So his opponents were right when they said you're theoretically correct, but it's technically impossible.
You'll never make it.
You'll never make it. We could not load a ship with enough water, fresh water, and food to make the journey.
Right.
Uh,
And they were right.
They were right. What they did not know, right about the dimensions of the world,
Mm.
what they did not know is that North America was in the way,
Mm.
opening up a new world with fantastic things.
Mm.
Fantastic for both sides. It was a startling revelation for the indigenous inhabitants to counter the Europeans.
Mm.
Revolutionized European life, things like potatoes
Mm.
and tomatoes. Anyway, that's it's embedded. I think that desire to find out what's out there is deep in the human psyche. It can be discouraged or encouraged by cultural circumstances,
Mm.
but the desire is there. And concomitant with that desire is a real interest.
Mm.
What about those things?
Mm.
Whatever's there, do they make contact with us?
Mm.
And it's not impossible. Hence the debate from Cheyenne to Douglas about could we baptize E.T.
Father, I was recently with family in Boston and we went and visited Christopher Columbus Park. And there is the pedestal of the statue of Christopher Columbus, sans Christopher Columbus.
Yes.
My understanding is that the city of Boston preemptively removed the statue during what was this 4 or 5 years ago, Tom, when there were all the riots, people protesting.
The year that shall not be mentioned.
Yeah. At any rate, I don't think it was taken down in a riot. I think that the city quietly removed it. So it sparked a bit of a discussion between me and some of my family members about the historical judgment of Christopher Columbus. What can you tell us? Was he
Cristoforo Colombo, Genovese.
Yeah, Genovese. Was he a slaver, as some people say? Was he an explorer primarily? Was he a combination of both?
He was an explorer primarily.
Mm.
He was a visionary on a grand epic scale.
Mm-hmm.
He was ambitious. He was a man of his time. His was a time that did accept the idea of slavery as a penalty for war, a penalty for waging war unjustly. What Columbus touched off, by the way, he touched off many things, but parenthetically, one of the things that touched off was a very lively discussion about natural law morality. What are the grounds that allow you to establish dominion over these native peoples?
Mm-hmm.
And that was an issue that was very energetically discussed.
Okay.
in the court of Spain and in the academies of Spain. The lazy assumption had been, so before Christopher Columbus bumping into what he thought was the East Indies, that quickly became clear, he never admitted it, quickly became clear he was wrong. Before then, there'd been the Spanish conquest of the Canary Islands.
Mm-hmm.
So this was not a novum entirely. So Christopher Columbus tended to think of the these new islands in the same terms as the Canary Islands,
Mm-hmm.
that the inhabitants could be brought into subjection because they were barbarian and heathen and
Okay.
needed guidance. Fairly crude notion.
Mm-hmm.
What's intriguing is that the crudity of that notion was increasingly discussed.
Mm-hmm.
And you find the beginnings of modern international law in 16th century Spanish scholastic debates.
Oh, interesting.
What are the grounds? What are the acceptable grounds? What are the unacceptable grounds on which the King of Spain may establish dominion over these peoples? And what should be the laws under which these peoples are governed?
Uh-huh.
What are their rights? It was quickly decided they do have rights. Then what are their rights? What is their status under law? Which is something that the Crown of Spain wrestled with really quite seriously. I'd venture to say the Crown of Spain took that more seriously than the Crown of England did.
Uh-huh.
So he took it as given that what was done in the Canary Islands could be repeated
Okay.
in these distant islands.
Which was basically, this is ours and we're in charge now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the native population, if they resist, they can be, because they resist the just cause of ending their barbarism,
Mm.
they can be made the labor force.
Uh-huh.
Not slavery in the strict sense, but made the labor force. That is a very crude idea.
Okay.
What's remarkable is not that this crude idea existed, and Columbus certainly accepted that crude idea, but again, on the basis of what was already the practice.
Call it the legal precedent of his
Canary
time.
Islands. What's really remarkable to me is not that this crude idea was accepted. I'm used to people accepting crude ideas. Crude ideas are easier. What's really remarkable to me is the lively discussion this touched off in Spain, and eventually Spanish laws that embodied a quite different understanding of the native population and how it was to be treated. Spanish laws that seem very enlightened in comparison to the scientific treatment of Native Americans by the United States government in the 19th century. We thought we were being scientific, but 19th century science was a more brutal thing than 16th century scholasticism. The triumph, I'll use that word, the triumph in law of a more enlightened, humane, truly Christian approach to native populations, the triumph of that in Spanish law is an impressive saga. That doesn't take away the gruesomeness of the conquest. Part of the problem is, what kind of guys are you going to get on a journey to a distant, strange, violent land? What guys are going to...
You're going to get some intense guys.
You're going to get some intense guys.
Yeah.
Who are ready to fight. They're young. They're going to be young to start with. They're going to be more adrenaline prone, more adrenaline dependent than average. They're going to be bolder than average. They're going to be probably more violent than average. They're not going to have the ties of domesticity, even the ties of romance. It's going to be hard to manage. Think about this later on. Gruesome story, gruesome story. I speak not to denounce the United States, but somewhat to defend the Spain at the time of Columbus. Think of what happened to the native population in California after the gold rush. Was it deliberate? It was not a deliberate plan by the United States government. On the other hand, California in the 1850s, 90% of the population was male under 30. If 90%, and this is not to pick on you, gentlemen, on you, Tom, male under 30, but if 90% of your population is unmarried, unconnected males under 30, certain kinds of behavior are going to be prominent. So when I speak of the triumph eventually of a truly Christian and humane and rational law in the Spanish Empire, that doesn't take away from the inherent unpleasantness of conquest. And particularly because the agents of conquest, and it tended to be a do-yourself conquest, the Spanish acquired the North American Empire on the cheap. These were not carefully prepared, for the most part, not carefully prepared expeditions financed by the crown.
Right.
Leaders would get permission from the crown to see what they could do. As you get into the latter part of the 16th century, the crown is no longer doing this. Partly because the results turn out to be chaotic. The conqueror of Peru, Pizarro, was eventually killed in an inter-Spanish conflict. The results tended to be chaotic, and the Spanish crown began to think, we have more people than we can manage already.
Running around the continent.
We've got more territory than we can defend already. We need to calm these people down. So, in context, Christopher Columbus is a man of his age. I think his age was crude in its thought about these very different populations. That crudeness was impressively corrected, partly the work of people like Bartolomé de las Casas, the famous Dominican. You've heard of him?
No.
He's not famous enough.
Yeah.
Bartolomé de las Casas, the famous Dominican friar who took up the cudgel in defense of indigenous rights in the Spanish Caribbean, and took this issue, made this issue prominent in Spain. There was not just a marked improvement, but something of intellectual revolution in terms of identifying what are human rights. And something of intellectual revolution in terms of identifying what is a natural, what are the natural laws that can govern nations and peoples, such that they can guide our relationship even with peoples of fantastically different culture. So as far as the achievement of Columbus is concerned, not the only figure. He is the most important figure, however, far from the only, right? Most important figure in what I call the reunification of the human race. The human race had scattered across the globe, was moving, if you will, evolving in different directions. Evolution proceeds slowly.
Right.
Physical evolution proceeds slowly. Cultural evolution, not so slowly.
Yeah.
The reunification of the human race, the splitting of the human race, symbolically described in Genesis, isn't it? The story of Babel. Splitting the human race goes back to the late Stone Age.
These would have been people going from Asia across to
exactly
a land bridge to Alaska and hence down.
And then losing, and then the different elements of the human race largely losing contact with each other.
Uh-huh.
Then at different times, there were temporary unifications of the Eurasian world,
Mm-hmm.
temporary partial reunifications of the Eurasian world.
Mm-hmm.
Say at the height of the Roman Empire, between the Roman Empire, the Persian Empire, and the Chinese Empire.
Mm.
Romans, the Chinese had no contact, but the Romans had contact with the Persians. The Chinese had contact with the Persians
Right.
and the Indians. So there was a kind of unification, then a breaking up again.
Mm.
Mongol period, as well as European trade, Marco Polo, missionary, Giovanni de Montecaprini. So Mongol Empire and European adventures, a temporary unification, splitting up again. What Christopher Columbus is the leading figure, hardly the only, the leading figure in the unification, the reunification of the human race. Globalization in the deepest, biggest sense, as people from different parts of the world ended up scattered all over the world. You can say we're still going through that process.
Could this have given a few thousand more years? I mean, could this have led to a further division of Homo sapiens
Oh, yes.
sapiens?
Oh, yes.
Goodness.
Yes. Yeah, in human evolution, that's one of the puzzles, by the way. How is it that there are no other species of genus Homo? That's very interesting.
Most people, most authors of the last 50 years would say we just killed them all.
That's not totally persuasive, however. It's one possible explanation.
Sure.
Uh,
But
little
yeah, I mean, that's
crazy.
Sapiens. Yeah, by Yuval Harari.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's his. That's the drum he beats.
All over the world, however.
Apparently. Yeah.
Evidence with the Neanderthals is a
Mm.
little more ambiguous, isn't it?
Mm.
Modern man and the Neanderthals interacting.
Certainly. Yeah. No, as far as I understand, we can find traces of their DNA in us even today.
Yes, which is fascinating, by the way.
Mm.
I've been following that since I was in college. That's
Mhm.
been back and forth too. When I was in college, the saying was, if you sat down on a park bench next to a properly dressed Neanderthal, you'd say this guy looks interesting, but it wouldn't freak you out.
Mm-hmm.
Then our understanding of the Neanderthals shifted. Early 2000s, people were talking very differently, but now it seems like they're back
Uh-huh.
to where they were in the 80s, or even a little further, that we share common DNA. In any case, it seems clear that given enough time, a human race that splits off from each other would have developed, yes, would have evolved into different subspecies.
Huh.
That moves much more slowly, of course,
Right.
than cultural evolution.
Mm.
But that ended conclusively late 15th, early 16th century.
Uh-huh.
And we're still going through that process.
Right.
The unification of the human race,
Right.
reunification of the human race.
Right. If we get thrust back into the Stone Age by the Yellowstone caldera or nuclear war or something, this thing might happen
Again.
Right. Or this possibility could loom again, but certainly the possibility was extinguished in our current timeline when
Yes.
Europeans got back to the continent.
And there's no question there's no question that there's been trauma,
Hmm.
considerable trauma with this process. Much of the trauma coming from diseases.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Which was at times unintentional, but at times intentional.
at times intentional, but generally there wasn't enough of it. I think that in the 1760s, early 1760s, part of Chief Pontiac's war, British General Bouquet or Buckets, I don't know how, whatever, but I think he had that idea of deliberately spreading smallpox.
Oh, geez, that's pretty dark.
Pretty dark.
Yeah.
I believe that Colonel Baylor in Arizona was so frustrated by the Apaches this is when the Confederates actually thrust into Arizona,
Mm-hmm.
that he had that notion. And he wasn't in Arizona for long. Also, he was overruled by Jefferson Davis,
Mm-hmm.
who found the thought appalling. So the idea was there, but there really wasn't the technical capacity to do it
Mm-hmm.
deliberately. It was quite enough to do it accidentally.
Mm.
The inroads of disease were at times catastrophic.
Mm-hmm.
Worked both ways. You look at the zones of European settlement in the Americas, for example, not much European settlement in truly tropic zones.
Mm-hmm.
Europeans were far too vulnerable to the tropic diseases,
Like malaria.
like malaria especially.
Mm-hmm.
Even in Mexico, European population tended to be more in the high country,
Okay. Up in the mountains.
in the mountains around Mexico City
Right.
or Puebla,
Mm-hmm.
not Veracruz
Mm.
on the coast or in the Yucatan.
Right.
So
That came later when we built resorts. That's when all the
yeah, as disease gets conquered,
right.
the early zones of European settlement is very striking.
Yeah.
Settlement in southern Africa,
Yeah.
but only trading posts in Central Africa.
Mm-hmm.
The British Army, which many campaigns in the Caribbean, huge casualties from disease,
Yeah.
to which European soldiers are terribly vulnerable.
Yeah.
So this unification of the human race has had its traumas,
Mm-hmm.
but do you? That's a big question. But the people who simply denounce Christopher Columbus and that whole process,
Right.
what are their grounds for arguing that the human race would be better off split
Mm-hmm.
into all its different components,
Mm.
going their different ways
Forever.
in mounting ignorance of each other
Uh-huh.
and mounting difference from each other?
Right.
Can I prove? Can I prove that what we experienced is better?
Mm.
I don't think I can prove it. I can suggest it.
Uh.
The spread of the potato has worked wonders for human populations and feeding people.
Mm-hmm.
Gift of the New World, as they said, gift of Peru to the rest of the world. And go on down the line.
Sorry, the potato. Forgive me. The potato was found in Peru?
Yes.
Okay.
Gift to the New World.
Okay.
So I think you can make a case for this having been beneficial for humanity.
Mm. Why specifically the potato? Because it can grow anywhere, it grows easily. What's
Grows
the
easily and high nutritional content,
okay.
caloric content.
Caloric. Okay. Yeah.
So I think you can, and then the taking of crops from different places and people's being able to adapt foods and crops from other zones and cultures and finding that those can thrive.
Mm.
New cultural ideas and the exciting effects that arise from encountering some of these ideas. So I think mestizaje, as they say in Spanish, I think mestizaje in the end is not a catastrophe for the human race, but it would be foolish, false. It'd be false to deny that the process of mestizaje hasn't had its traumas.
Do you think that in certain parts of American culture there was an effort to sort of create a hagiography around Columbus and some of his peers, and maybe that was objected to by other parts of the culture? Like, no, these men were not saints.
They were not.
Let's not. And so there's this anger that there was an effort to make them into saints. Do you think that's true?
There's an element of that, yes.
Okay. But do you think at the same time, in an effort to remind everyone that they were not saints, do you think there was this other somewhat false effort to turn them into villains?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely. Rather than appreciating them as great and flawed men of their time,
Mm-hmm.
much as the great men of our time
Mm-hmm.
are flawed. It's been a theme of mine for years. Back in college, I started to take up arms, so to speak, in defense of all people, in defense of Winston Churchill.
Uh-huh.
Some people were appalled to discover he said some stupid things. And occasionally did some stupid things
Mm.
or nasty things. And yet, at a crucial moment in history,
Mm-hmm.
he was absolutely indispensable.
Mm-hmm.
No one else could have pulled off, I still argue this, no one else could have pulled off what he did. And
Which was to rally a nation.
rally a nation in the face of manifest defeat.
Mm.
And this defeat is not the end of the story. De Gaulle tried to do that for France, and he had something of that personality, but France was much more obviously crushed. De Gaulle's famous line, France has lost a battle, France has not lost the war.
But there were German soldiers enjoying the cafes of Paris.
It was harder for De Gaulle. In English course, one French general did point this out. Easy for you to keep fighting. The English Channel is a wonderful anti-tank ditch. Which is a point.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, morale could easily, I think morale is at a knife's edge after defeat that humiliating and that complete.
And that's sudden. Yeah.
Sudden. Yeah, that restoration of morale after defeat in face of danger. I don't think anyone else could have pulled it off.
No one else would have had the guts to try to pull it
Even
off.
try to pull it off.
They might have just said, "Oh, this is I can't try to."
And that was Hitler's assumption that, of course, Britain was going to make peace.
And Hitler was prepared to do that. He would have come to some
On his
terms.
terms.
On his terms.
On his terms.
Let us rule Europe.
Let us rule Europe. Yes. On his terms. Let us rule Europe, and Britain with Britain as a German vassal. That was a tragedy. I said something very harsh about Britain earlier, didn't I? You know, I said that the Spanish laws regarding the indigenous population were vastly more Christian,
humane, yeah,
enlightened than the British laws in North America. I would stick to that. But I will say this: Britain faced a tragic, in the deep sense of the word, tragic option in 1940, and dimly realized it. And what makes it heroic tragedy is that there was some realization of this. That Britain's empire is broken. The events of 41, 42 made that clear, especially the humiliating Japanese capture of Singapore. British empire is broken.
Okay.
We're going to be someone's vassal, in effect. That's the tragedy of their situation.
In 1940, it's over.
1940 to 42. 1940, driven from the continent. 1942, the catastrophe in Asia. The humiliating capture of Singapore. We're going to be someone's vassal. It's going to be America or Germany. Tragic situation. The deepest sense of the word. I think it's one of the greatest tragic dilemmas in history. And it is lastingly to the credit of Britain of that era that they said, strange as the Americans are, and annoying as the Americans are. You heard the classic joke from Britain of the era about American soldiers in Britain. You've heard it. You've heard it.
The complaint of the British military corps about the American military servicemen who were posted in England
in vast numbers
was, you know, we don't mind the fact that they're fighting with us and for us. We don't really love the fact that they're posted here in England, because frankly, they're overpaid, they're oversexed, and they're over here.
So
that's funny.
Oh, that's great.
strange as the Americans can be, annoying as the Americans can be, the world at this moment needs us to choose them rather than Germany. A Nazi Germany.
Hmm.
The history of the world would have been dramatically different had Britain chosen otherwise.
Was there an argument to, I mean, was there anyone arguing that like, maybe we should accept this European
Okay.
power?
Oh, yes.
Really?
Oh, yes. It was on a knife. I'm going to say it again, knife's edge.
No way.
Because the defeat had been, mind you, the worst crimes of the Nazis had not yet been committed or revealed, but that they were nasty was clear enough.
Right.
That they were dangerous is clear enough.
Okay.
But that was part of the problem. They're very dangerous. Do we want to get invaded?
Uh-huh.
Can we hold out?
Long enough for the Americans to help
That's
us.
exactly it. The only way we can hold out in the end is for the Americans to come. And if the Americans come, and I think it was dimly realized, we're going to be second fiddle.
Oh, it's over.
Yeah.
The age of the empire.
The empire is done.
Mm-hmm.
And 42 made that clear. Churchill was so reluctant to accept that, never did quite accept it. But it's so obvious after the war, the effort to put the empire together again was pathetic. India was done. The war meant, again, it's the tragic, but a certain heroism to it. The war meant the end of the British Empire. At some level, British knew that, and they still did it. And there's a certain heroism to that. It wasn't perfectly understood. It was not chosen with emphatic clarity. The inside of the British war effort was by no means uniform heroism. Yves Lenoir, in his caustic way, gives briefly in Brideshead Revisited and in a more extended way in his sort of honor trilogy, he gives sort of a view of that. It was not a thing of pure heroism and
Self-sacrifice.
Self-sacrifice.
Yeah.
Had a lot of moral flab to it, an intellectual flab to it. Nonetheless, Britain chose against obvious self-interest. Britain chose to fight.
Okay. So, right. If you know that the end of the empire is here.
In a vague way, right?
You could choose the safe option of submitting to Germany.
Right.
Because then you don't get invaded.
Then you get invaded and you'll, for a while, preserve something of your global empire. For a while.
Right.
As the scriptural image goes, the writing was on the wall. Many tekel upson had been written, but could have lasted longer. Parts of it might have some partial existence today. Fell apart quite rapidly after the war. Because of the war.
Because of the war.
It's like in order to save the world, they had to give it back.
Ooh, that's not bad.
Yeah, Tom, I like that.
It's not bad.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Someone claimed, I haven't researched this myself, but someone claimed that the most common holiday among the world's nations is independence from Britain, which in a way is a backhanded compliment to the British Empire.
Right.
It's funny you mentioned that. I saw a meme today that most people think England because we all have Independence Days now.
That's right. I've heard that said. I mean, look at the map. British Empire at different times at its height.
Quite extensive.
Quite extensive.
Was their ultimate problem just a lack of manpower?
In the end, it's a small island. Yes. It was able to have its empire partly by lack of competition. In other words,
Mm.
for 100 years, roughly, in the Napoleonic Wars to World War One, for roughly 100 years, Britain had two luxuries. Did not have to send any large armies to the continent.
Mm-hmm.
The British Army was very busy during those years. I've got a nice little book about that, by the way. Fun book, Queen Victoria's Little Wars.
That's funny.
The splendid little wars.
That was a phrase used about the Spanish-American War.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Queen Victoria's Little Wars. But British Army was busy, but it was a small professional army,
Uh-huh.
barely impinged on the British economy,
Ah,
the
okay.
consciousness of Britons, except hero stories.
Right.
And they did have a certain style, has to be admitted.
Mm.
Kind of an insane style. Battle of Yorktown. We Americans knew we had this done.
Mm-hmm.
We knew we were winning that battle. The Cornwallis army was trapped in Yorktown. And we knew that this was the last throw of the dice for the British in North America. So basically we are winning the war. And we got a little giddy, including Alexander Hamilton got giddy. And at one point, Alexander Hamilton ordered his troops to get in full view of British artillery and do their drill, their manual of arms drill. The British didn't fire at them. And sometimes a historian wondered, why didn't the British fire at them? And possibly it's because the British officers were jealous that they didn't think of doing this. So that was the kind of style they had. And they had a certain style that at times it seems kind of crazy, and at times it captures your imagination. Admiration. Anyway, they did not have to send a large army to the continent for 100 years. And no one for almost 100 years until the early 20th century and the bizarre German naval buildup. But for almost 100 years, no one challenged them at sea. So they're able to have the world's largest navy at a discount because nobody else is trying to have a global
no. No one was sinking their ships.
No one was trying to sink their ships. No one is trying to build a global navy. So for 100 years, almost 100 years, they had that luxury. And so I think that luxury is a major part of what made a global British Empire possible. And once Britain had challengers at sea, the United States and more annoyingly Germany, and once Britain had to send large numbers of troops to the continent, World War One, the end was at hand. Especially because during World War One, Britain basically, to make a long story short, went bankrupt, and the United States financed their war effort.
Yeah, I mean, this touches on modern
Like
politics.
they took out a mortgage.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you were telling me that much of the British support for the establishment of a Jewish state actually stemmed from a belief inside England at the end of World War
1917.
and towards the end of World War One that
They didn't know it was the end of World War One.
okay.
What they knew is that we weren't winning. Britain was going bankrupt. They couldn't seem to deal with the German army. No matter how many new people they brought into the war, the Germans kept winning. Britain's going bankrupt. They're starting to get desperate. So yes, there was a vaguely anti-Semitic, in a gentlemanly kind of way, vaguely anti-Semitic idea that the Jews acted in unison. The Jews controlled the New York money markets, and that therefore we need to get the Jews to like us. And to get them to like us, we'll say that we support a Jewish homeland in Palestine without seriously considering how that was going to work.
And also without seriously considering if financiers in New York banking houses
They
actually
didn't-
really
they didn't
wanted
care.
that.
One way or the other, they didn't care.
Hmm.
What they wanted to do was make money. And so they loaned vast amounts of money to Britain on fairly short-term loans, however.
And but it is true to say that most of these finance houses were run by at least ethnic Jews.
Not most, no.
Oh, not most.
No,
Oh,
not most.
so where did Britain get the idea that we owe the Jews something as opposed to?
It's very odd, isn't it? It just seemed to be in the cultural ambiance.
Oh my
In
God.
Russia, it took a really sinister form,
Mhm.
very sinister form. This is the cultural background of the story of Fiddler on the Roof, for example, but it's
Mhm.
based on increasing persecution of Jews in Russia. So in Russia, it took a very
Because everyone thought the Jews they're up to something,
up to something.
and they're all in on it.
They're all in on it. Yes, they're all in on it.
Right,
So
some Russian farmer
in Russia too.
and
Exactly.
and some New York financier. They're
Exactly.
they're talking to each other.
Somehow. Yes, somehow people in a Russian ghetto and a New York banker are talking to each other. It's insane. And in Russia, this insanity took a lethal form.
Hmm.
In Britain, it took a more gentlemanly form. Um, but it was the same kind. And yeah, truly, just finished reading a fine book about Palestine between the wars and the headache it became for the British Empire.
Uh,
I say, many tickle upson, the writing was on the wall.
Hmm.
The British couldn't handle Palestine. They already couldn't handle Ireland. They'd had to give basic independence to Ireland. They were losing their grip on India.
After World War One.
After World War One.
Okay.
Mahatma Gandhi.
So on paper, between the world wars, on paper, the empire still existed.
Yes.
It only became obvious in 1940, 1942 that even on paper, this is not working.
It's yes, the empire is, and if there's one event, like two events. One, the smashing defeat of the British and the French in France.
Mm-hmm.
So shocking. It was actually in one of Gandhi's less admirable moments. Everyone stumbles sometimes. He actually expressed his appreciation for the German victory because it revealed the British Empire is done. It was bad enough in World War One. Britain, France, and Russia together couldn't defeat Germany. But it's much worse in World War II, where Britain and France together got smashed,
Pounded
by Germany. France overrun. Britain, because the anti-tank ditch was not called the English Channel, was not overrun. Driven from the continent in disarray. And then 42, the disaster at Singapore, where a smaller Japanese force outmaneuvers the British Army and forces surrender. One of the worst defeats in the history of the British Empire. But many tickle upson, again, the writing was on the wall. War in 1939 meant the end of the empire. And there was some awareness of this. And yet, Britain took that risk. And there's a certain heroism to that. The willingness the ability to see, even in a dim way, that this German Empire under Hitler and his Nazis, this is a different kind of German Empire. And this
will be a scourge upon
this
the world.
Bad news for the human race. It's a risk we have to take. We didn't have to take the risk in 1914. We still don't like to admit that, but I think it's true.
So
in 1939, it was a risk they had to take, and they took it. I'm going to say it again: tragic, but heroic. Tragic meant the end of the empire, but they did it.
What happened in Palestine between 1917 and 1947?
Oh,
all right. Maybe should we tighten the timeline?
Confusion, uncertainty, mounting hatred. No one had a plan.
Okay.
The incoming Jewish settlers, they didn't have a plan for how we're going to share this country. with the Palestinians.
Mm-hmm.
The Palestinians didn't have a plan for how we're going to incorporate Jewish settlers. The British didn't have a plan for how the heck we're going to make this idea of ours work. So both sides, all three sides, really. British ended up with everyone hating them. All three sides, Jewish, Palestinian, British, all three sides, they made it up as they went along.
Okay.
All three improvised. The Jews improvised best. Palestinians improvised worst.
Hmm.
The British somewhere in between.
The British were there.
They were there, and increasingly they were not happy about being there, but they had volunteered to be there.
Hmm.
It was their darned idea.
Hmm.
They thought it'd be very glorious to take over the Holy Land,
Mm-hmm.
and found
And
it.
so this is what was referred to as the British Mandate.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so they were protecting Jewish settlers up until 1947.
Oh, they found themselves in a position of trying to keep the two sides away from each other.
Ah.
They were trying to limit Jewish settlements at times, but also trying to persuade the Palestinians to accept it. And increasingly, legally, it wasn't part of the British Empire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, everyone knew it was.
Mm-hmm.
They treated it as part of the British Empire, but legally, it was a mandate by from the United Nations.
Right.
And sooner or later, there was supposed to be some sort of independence, but nobody knew what kind of independence. Is it going to be a Palestinian state with some sort of special status for a Jewish enclave? Is it going to be a Jewish state with some sort of special status for a Palestinian enclave? Is it going to be two states? Nobody knew. And
Least of all, Jewish bankers in New York who were like, oh,
by and large, did not much care.
like, oh, they sent some troops over there. Wonderful.
Yes, it wasn't, there was support from American Jews, certainly,
Mm-hmm.
And generous support, but it was not a burning issue
Uh-huh.
until after the horrors of World War II.
Ah, okay.
Clearly, World War II, you had, the mind still boggles at it, still boggles,
Mm-hmm.
still boggles that a major state, Germany,
Mm-hmm.
made a serious effort,
Mm-hmm.
a serious, expensive, painstaking effort to kill each and every single Jew
on the planet.
on the planet. The enormity of the idea, that the profound evil of the idea, but the enormity of the idea still boggles the mind.
That there was at least no one with that, just from a practical sense.
We're fighting a desperate war against considerable odds.
Right.
And we're
Right.
devoting all these efforts to this.
Right.
Lunacy, utter, complete lunacy. Which is why it was the first reports that were so hard to believe. It made no sense.
A lot of people did not think a civilized nation would ever undertake such a project.
Yes, even Justice Brandeis on the Supreme Court, even Justice Brandeis, his initial response was, this must be exaggerated.
Right.
It doesn't make sense.
It
doesn't make sense.
Too difficult. It's too expensive. And they're fighting.
Yeah. You're fighting a desperate war. Germany's fighting a desperate war against overwhelming odds. How do they find that? Why are they devoting resources to this? But they were. They were. So after World War II, there was already support, of course, for a Jewish state in Palestine. Sometimes generous support, but after World War II, it was a burning issue.
Okay.
Burning issue
for everyone across the globe.
For the world's Jews across the globe.
Okay. All right. So all of a sudden,
Jewish
bankers in New York did care.
Yes, it was because, I mean, we use the phrase, certain American politicians, I made a mistake. One of the evil things about YouTube is that occasionally you will run the risk of looking at politicians speak.
Far the worst thing.
And two solemn politicians talking about how this election is an existential election.
Mm.
What does that mean? I think in his dim sort of way, he meant to say this involves an existential threat. What the hell? Existential threat means somebody's trying to kill you. You don't say that lightly, but World War II, Holocaust, existential threat in the most literal sense. An effort had been made, serious effort had been made to kill every single Jew.
Hmm.
So it seemed to be, because of that existential threat, defeated. Because of that existential threat, it seemed to be an existential necessity to have a well-armed and powerful Jewish homeland. So that transformed the issue.
Ah, okay.
So I'm next
So
on my reading.
Yeah, so it was this sort of side issue between the world wars, but then after World War II, all of a sudden.
Side issue is a good way to describe it.
Okay.
There were those who were intensely interested, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but for the British Empire, it was a side issue.
Hmm.
For American Jews, it was a side issue.
Mm-hmm.
There was hot debate among British Jews, generally approving the idea, but not wanting to push it too far, because what does that say about us, for whom Britain is our home?
Mm-hmm.
But so side issue, a lot of people supported it. For only a few was it a major cause. But after World War II, how could you argue against it? The British after World War II had the mess on their hands.
Right.
Their empire is clearly falling apart. The Arabs in Egypt and in Transjordan meant to have real independence, not this sort of bizarre costuming the British had.
Yeah.
The French, the Arabs in Lebanon and Syria meant to have real independence. The Arabs in Palestine meant to have real independence. The British Empire is going. Jewish community worldwide and everyone who sympathized with it want seriously to support a Jewish state of Israel. In between of the British, who have no idea what to do. So they oscillate wildly from trying to suppress Palestinian resistance to trying to prevent further Jewish immigration, and everyone ends up shooting at the British. Until the British decide, okay.
So the British decided, like, damn it, not more of this, you know?
We're done. No, again, that's another moment in Britain saying the empire's over.
Tired of everyone shooting at us.
We're tired of everyone shooting at us.
Yeah.
But yes, the handwriting had been on the wall for some time. Now, what does that have to do with aliens?
We'll decide right after this break. Let's take a quick one.
Was Kitchener an alien?
Live? Yeah, we're live. We're back. Father, we got to solve.
Say that Herbert Kitchener was an alien.
Herbert Kitchener. Yeah. Right. Yeah, he spread his likeness all over the world eventually, right? Because other recruiting offices picked up that.
That's right. They picked up that same image.
Yeah, I want you.
I want you to die in World War
I. Oh, and many of them responded. Yeah. Yeah.
Astonishing numbers.
Oh my goodness.
Before they started drafting in 1916.
Mm-hmm.
Again, talking about the death of the British Empire, it started to die close to home. It started to die in Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
Things had evolved in Ireland to the point that, to the great disgust of Irish nationalists, most Irish were not actively rebellious and basically supported Britain in World War I until the British government decided to extend conscription to Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
So that the Irish could join in the god-awful
butchery
deaths on the Western Front. 40,000, first day of the Battle of the Somme, famous number, 40,000 dead in one day in the British Army.
just on one side.
Just on one side.
We have the numbers from the German side.
We do,
don't-
but I don't know, I don't remember them.
Hmm.
I've got a
40.
book I haven't read yet.
40,000.
About the German experience in the Somme.
Mm-hmm.
I have a book by two Australian historians.
Mm-hmm.
100 years and more have passed, but British historians still can't confront the catastrophe of the Somme calmly.
Uh-huh.
Took two Australian historians to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And catastrophe is the word.
Mm-hmm. I mean, 40,000. I mean, that's the loss
Day.
in a day.
The preceding days, the battle were not that level of awfulness, but
Mm-hmm.
gets across the idea the British Army was breaking itself,
Mm-hmm.
and the Irish refused.
Why was there not a movement inside England, like the literal homeland, to say enough is enough? We can't keep
Very
doing this.
interesting. Very interesting. What all sides found, and this was the rock that wrecked Pope Benedict XV's very noble peace campaign,
Mm-hmm.
peace proposal. Both sides found so much blood and treasure had been sacrificed
Mm.
that it was almost psychologically impossible, almost psychologically and emotionally impossible to say, we're not going to win this. We have to settle for something short of victory.
Mm.
So
We just got, okay, psychologically impossible to say, like, well, we're going to sort of stop where we started and we've lost half of a generation
yes,
and a whole lot of money.
a vast amount of money. Britain, by 1917, Britain is basically bankrupt. The Americans are in the war effort. Britain is almost mortgaged to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Half a generation, better than losing a whole generation. But the psychological difficulty of being the first in your government to say seriously, we are not going to win.
Mm.
We need to settle for something short of victory. Very difficult. The German Reichstag called for that, which was impressive.
Mm-hmm.
The Reichstag didn't run Germany.
Well, that's something equivalent to the Joint Chiefs of Staff?
No, Parliament.
Oh, Parliament. Okay.
In Britain, very distinguished former Viceroy of India, former Foreign Minister, Lord Curzon, wrote an editorial calling for a compromised peace, killed him socially. The decision makers felt unable to say to their people, after all of this sacrifice, there is not victory.
We kind of wasted this.
Yes, which is true.
Mm.
But to be willing to say it, to be able to say it, oh my. So the unraveling the British Empire began at that point. It began in Ireland. They told the Irish that you're going to be conscripted too.
Mm-hmm.
And that they would not accept.
Isn't this where, in theory, the monarchy is supposed to step in? You know, like the monarchy can call for
Fan.
Yeah, we need to get rid of this. Get rid of this fly, unintended guest on the podcast. Like you have the people actually running the British government, right?
Yes.
And then you have the figures of the monarchy. Isn't this where the monarchy should be stepping in and setting some of the moral vision for the country?
Well, the British understanding right now, constitutionally, the monarch would only be able to do that if the Constitution are being violated.
Ah, okay.
It's a little like, very different circumstance, but a little like how in World War II, people have asked, why didn't Hirohito, before the atomic bombs,
Mm-hmm.
why didn't the emperor step in?
Mm-hmm.
But it was understood that that's not the emperor's role. Symbol of national unity.
Uh-huh.
Unity today, but also unity with the past, unity across time.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I understand it, the British understanding of their constitution is that the monarch would only step in if the constitution were being violated.
So they would not, okay, there wasn't an opportunity lost then.
I don't know. I think that was realistic.
Okay.
And in Germany, the Reichstag was able to vote and say that we want a peace short of victory. But in the German system, the Reichstag couldn't enforce that. They were only expressing an opinion.
Right.
German decision-making by that time had fallen from the Kaiser, rested in the hands of the rather sinister and slightly insane figure of Ludendorff.
Ludendorff. Sinister and slightly insane.
He insisted on, with the backing of Admiral Tirpitz, insisted on unconditional submarine warfare against Britain, despite the fact that the United States had made it very clear that we regarded unconditional submarine warfare as grounds for war. So famously, Germany made that decision. Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg, who despite being chancellor, really didn't have decision-making power anymore. Famously, poor Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg said, "Finis Germaniae," end of Germany.
Terrible.
Terrible. Again, that's why aliens taking a close look at us might have doubts about getting too close to us.
Getting too involved. Yeah.
They'll be like, we'll just tiptoe around these guys.
Right, exactly.
Make them think we might exist. Let them guess for a few thousand years.
Right.
Maybe they'll get over this homicidal streak.
Why are we running so headlong in the direction of the development and empowerment of AI, even though it seems like we're all scared of it, but no one is saying, well, let's stop developing these things. All right. We're constantly training new AIs or trying to refine existing AIs. And it seems that to me that people are nervous that AIs will be able to do the things that humans do.
A lot of them. Not all of them.
But it seems to me to resemble the way in which some people were worried when there were indications of high levels of intelligence in mammals that were popularized, I think, in the 90s and early 2000s. Hey, look, those chimps are using tools. Hey, look, that gorilla is using sign language.
Yeah, so remember that from college.
Yeah.
That's one of my exercises. First exercise in a class in human evolution. First exercise, go down to the zoo in DC and observe the primates doing their thing. Doing all their things.
Doing all of that.
All their things. Observe the primates doing their things and write the results. And it occurred to me that in a sense, yes, there is an intelligence there. Although this is putting it a little too harshly, but I was a college student. There's intelligence there, but nonetheless, they're in the cage and we're here. There's a difference. Not just an order of magnitude quantitatively. There's a qualitatively different intelligence. There's a kind of intelligence at work in ants.
Yeah, an aggregate intelligence.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
yeah, Michael Crichton puts this in one of his novels.
Does he?
Yeah.
He's
I think.
novelist.
Yeah, he is. He's fun. He's a lot of fun. Say again.
Has he passed?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Qualitatively different intelligence. So when it comes to AI, I'm quite convinced it is qualitatively different from ours. In a certain range, it is quantitatively vastly superior. That is to say, it can carry out operations of a stunning number of operations in a stunningly short time. So quantitatively vastly superior to ours in a certain area, but qualitatively really quite different.
Why are people scared of it? Are we always scared of intelligence?
Mhm. We're scared that we may have accidentally invented us,
Mm,
but we haven't, by definition. Man is a rational animal.
mm-hmm,
We are biological
mm,
and rational, which is to say in intelligent in a very broad sense, not a narrow field of operations.
mm-hmm.
Uh, we don't just do math, we write symphonies. Uh, we don't just do math, we create elaborate rules for cricket. Uh,
Ah,
human intelligence is it's a friend of mine, a psychologist, started his graduate work doing in the field of intelligence.
mhm.
He shifted. He never gave me a straight answer for why he shifted. He only said he only gave an answer I didn't believe, but it was his flip answer. I shifted because I got depressed at how stupid average actually is.
Mm,
But I think his real reasons were deeper, having to do with it's difficult to research intelligence when we cannot define it.
mm,
And it's not easy to define human intelligence. It is so varied.
mm-hmm,
It embraces everything from Aristotelian syllogisms to Newtonian mathematics to Einsteinian physics to playing the piano to playing baseball
mm,
to writing sonatas to writing poetry
mm-hmm,
to painting the Last Supper.
mm.
It's not easy to define.
To telling jokes.
Selling jokes, running podcasts,
Mm.
doing interesting things with cheese.
I do love good brie. Yeah.
It's not easy to define human intelligence
Mm,
precisely because it is so multifaceted.
mm-hmm,
But it's that very multifacetedness.
mm,
It's that very multifacetedness that makes it so outstandingly, and I say quite obviously different from the kind of intelligence that ants have, or the kind of intelligence that primates have, or the quite different kind of intelligence that you might say a computer has.
mm.
It's intelligence of a totally different sort. Going back to our intelligence in all its multifacetedness is a physical thing. It is a biological intelligence. It's not merely biological,
Mm-hmm.
but we do not separate the holomorphic union. We do not separate body from soul,
Mm.
form from matter. Our intelligence, while it's not merely biological, is biological. And I think that it's that interconnection, that intermingling of the spiritual and the biological that gives human intelligence its multifacetedness.
Mm.
I think it's impossible, philosophical grounds alone, as well as theological, and I argue practical grounds. Someone asked a AI to write a poem about Wyoming. The result was what a friend of mine called real estate porn.
Seen some of that in my day.
Yes. So it's I argue that philosophical grounds, theological grounds, I think experiential grounds, it is intelligence of a radically different sort. Perhaps that's what makes us uncomfortable too. Can you say lesser intelligence? I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
Because in some respects, the speed of operation,
Mm-hmm.
ours is dwarfed by it.
Mm-hmm.
But you certainly can't say greater either. It lacks the multifacetedness.
Mm-hmm.
It's just really different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes us nervous. I don't personally, I don't have the fear of it that some have. At the same time, I don't understand. I don't understand the desire to develop it. I am somewhat puzzled by what good
What good are we seeking?
are we seeking?
Hmm.
Is this more than look what I can do?
Hmm.
Which is a very human thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I listened to some of the guests and then to Joe Rogan, and it seems that between him and a few of his guests, I get this general sense that there's a desire to make a general artificial intelligence that can look after us.
That would be a mistake.
Um,
Thanks.
like it's almost as if we want that, we have that term Deus ex machina, the God who descends to fix things. And it seems to me that um, there's lurking somewhere
Looked
in,
like a dramatic gesture.
yeah, you're just shooing away a fly. Um,
I say thee nay.
yeah, to the fly. Yeah. Yeah, it seems to me that there's some desire to create something that will then give us the code, right? We will write the code, we will use code to create a thing that then mandates that we obey its code, and in doing so we shall be saved. It seems to be in there. I couldn't swear to it. I haven't interviewed these AI scientists myself.
No. If, and I was thinking along those lines, he's of course a fool. C.S. Lewis observed he was not against all technology, but he wasn't as hostile to automobiles as J.R.R. Tolkien was. But C.S. Lewis observed that we need to remember that the power of man over nature always carries with it the power of man over man.
Yes, this is an abolition of man. Yeah,
Yes, abolition of man. Every human technology confers power on someone, some human being. Therefore, my fear of AI, if you remember the right word, my nervousness about it. To whom does it give power? It gives it power. I don't think it gives power to itself.
That's what's okay. But please continue.
To whom does it give power?
Yeah. I think some people might say AI will then take power unto itself, but that's sort of humanizing it.
It's humanizing it.
Yeah, as if it might want power.
Yeah, it might not understand power. So as we understand power, in the end, I think it is a tool, very powerful tool, possibly a difficult to control tool.
Like a car on an icy road.
Car on an icy road. I was talking to someone today whose athletic endeavors have been somewhat limited the past few years because got bucked off a horse. A horse does not have intelligence as we have intelligence, but it does have a mind of its own. AI, in a very different way from a horse, clearly,
right?
Does not have intelligence as we have intelligence, but it does have a mind of its own. Your tool can buck you off sometimes. So it's a tool. I think it's a tool that may be difficult to control. And I also think it's a tool that delivers power to particular human beings. Who are those human beings? How will they be monitored? How will they be held accountable? We have a hard time holding tech giants, tech moguls today accountable.
So maybe the people who are racing so quickly to develop these, they see power at the end of the tunnel.
I believe they see power at the end of the tunnel.
Right. If I
power for good, of course.
Power for me.
Power for me, and that has to be good because my intentions are benign. Everyone tells themselves, almost everyone, very few people are so far gone that they'll say, oh, I want to cause pain, misery, and suffering. And yet, people have caused pain, misery, and suffering in vast amounts. Someone's telling me today about having pushed her way through all 3 volumes of Gulag Archipelago.
Hmm.
I said that must have been, I said that was depressing. She made a good correction. She said, grim, not necessarily depressing. Ooh, there's a difference. That's useful. But in any case, Gulag Archipelago and all the horrors of the Soviet regime and communist regimes everywhere, up to and including the Sandinista SOBs who are making life miserable in Nicaragua today. The horrors of communism, ongoing horrors of communism, do not come from people saying, ooh, who can I make miserable today? They come from people who look in the mirror and say to themselves, I'm going to make the world a better place. I have a vision. I hate that word. I have a vision, and I'm going to impose my vision on the world. And, I might have to, as the saying goes, I might have to break a few eggs to make this omelet, but it's all going to be great in the end because I have this vision. The world will thank me for it. They'll make statues of me, or maybe they won't make statues of me because perhaps in this bright, wonderful future, we'll be beyond recognizing individuals as heroic. I'm going to ask you a strange question. Have you ever read early communist science fiction?
No.
Such a thing.
It is a thing. My single most bizarre course in college was early communist science fiction. In early communist science fiction, they like to have utopias.
Mm-hmm.
This is the whole communist experiment.
Hmm.
Mad experiment. The whole communist experiment was about creating utopia. I read these and I thought, if this were possible, which is not, if this were possible, I would hate like hell to live in it. Because the individual is completely subsumed into the glorious collective. Yeah, there were no statues of great heroes because it's all of us together. Of course, if you're going to assume the individual, that means you have to wipe out everyone who is too individual and is dissenting from your glorious, benign agenda. So benignly, you create gulags.
For the good of the people.
That's what I'm nervous about AI. It delivers power into particular human hands. Whose hands? And how will they use it?
Why do they want it?
Why do they want it?
Reminds me of what you're saying about like it's all us, there's no individual. Have you read that quick book? It might not even be a booklet called Anthem by Ayn Rand.
I haven't, only because I attempted to read Atlas Shrugged, and after about 100 pages, I thought, I could be doing something really interesting like cleaning my toilet.
I was just curious.
Put it aside. No, I have not. A literary giant, she was not.
Yeah, I just was curious. It was just like I thought a pretty well said, quick story of what communism can divulge into. And the whole thing was like you couldn't say personal pronouns, you could only use collective pronouns.
What?
We, they, us.
Early communist science fiction. That's
Yeah.
not too far removed from that. It was enlightening in a way. But very strangely, paradoxically, early communist science fiction got shut down under Stalin. The crimes of communism preceded Stalin. Thus, they certainly continued under Stalin. But Stalin didn't share this fascination with not having great heroes, because clearly
He's got to be one of them.
he had to be one of them.
All right, we need at least one.
We need at least one.
Yeah. And he better have a mustache.
But that's my nervousness about AI. It will deliver power into certain human hands. To whom will they be accountable? How will they use their power? They will not be immune from the corrupting effects of power.
And And neither will their tools.
Neither will their tool.
All right. I think that's what, yeah. I sense that there are
Neither
some
will their
people there are some people who hope that AI will not be susceptible to the corruptions of human nature.
Sorry. It's a human tool.
It's a human tool.
Human tool with a mind of its own. That's a twist. Nonetheless, a human tool.
Mm-hmm.
It may reflect the twists in the minds of its owners.
Mhm.
That's a slightly scary thought.
Mm.
And there already is. I mean, I don't know if you've heard about ChatGPT, but it's very left leaning.
Mm.
Like you ask it to say praises of Biden, for example, go on and on. Say, what about Trump? Nothing.
Yeah.
Or
But that gets to my point.
yeah,
It's not intelligence in the sense of ideas of its own. It is developing the ideas placed into it.
that's why I'm wondering if it's actually intelligent.
It is not. It is not.
Yeah,
It's intelligence in a very restricted sense.
it can program. If you give it a set of axioms, it can give you the conclusion very fast.
Yes. It is totally, stunningly swift operation in a narrow field. It lacks the multifacetedness that is human intelligence.
Mm.
A multifacetedness so extreme that it's difficult to define human intelligence. The whole history of intelligence testing is a depressing but enlightening, not depressing, grim, but enlightening discovery of this fact. You devise different intelligence tests, but you still are only testing a narrow range of a gloriously, magnificently diverse and fertile thing. What a marvelous man. And maybe that's what distresses me spiritually about the whole AI thing, that the people enthusiastic about it don't seem to appreciate themselves. That is to say, they don't, maybe they appreciate themselves. We're great enough to come up with this, but they don't seem to appreciate man, humanity, human beings.
Like, I'm wondering if the basis of human intelligence is we're able to believe something.
Yes.
Because if I just was thinking about this today and yesterday, I guess a few more days than that. But if you think about who
Yeah.
you'd say is someone's smart or someone's dumb, it's what they believe in. Usually, it's like, well, if someone's smart, then they'll be like, they've thought about it, so they've seemed like they've attached themselves to the truth more than other people.
We have to have, we have to have faith. No one can deal without this.
Yeah,
At some point, there are things you take on faith.
right.
But faith is not an irrational thing.
No.
You trust your senses. You know that they need a little bit of correction, but it's insane to question your current experience as fundamentally wrong.
Mhm.
Am I really seeing Tom Tisnick? I'm seeing Tom Tisnick. Hi, Tom. You look good today. It is insane to question fundamentally your sense experience.
Because if you do, you're left with nothing.
You're left with
Ultimately.
nothing, unless you're Descartes and you try to go back to, I think, therefore I am. No. Our starting point is faith that our sense experience is fundamentally valid.
Mhm.
This brings you back. Yeah. So this
Which is an act of faith.
It's an act of faith.
No.
I do not need to prove to you, Renee, or whoever, or Barclay. Famous story about, you've heard the story, Samuel Johnson stubbing his toe, feeling pain and saying, thus do I refute Barclay. Yeah, I do not need to prove to you, Descartes or Barclay, that my senses are reliable. I accept that on faith, and that is a rational thing to do. You are something of a lunatic in demanding that it be proven to you that your fingers are actually there. But that brings you back to, yes, faith and physicality. Our intelligence is rooted in faith. In that sense, it's spiritual. Our intelligence is also rooted in our physicality, our biology. Our intelligence is not something that can be abstracted from our brain.
Hmm.
It's not reducible to our brain, but nor can it be abstracted by
Right.
from our brain.
Yeah, because you'd have to like the idea is you have to be able to build on something to learn
Yes.
more.
Hmm.
And so if you don't have anywhere to set your footing, like your foundation,
You need a foundation.
then you essentially you can't go anywhere. So that's why I wonder if AI is actually intelligent because the machine itself can't say this is true or not.
Correct.
It can only say this is true from what I've been told.
What has been told by its master.
But it can't self-reflect, which seems to be one of the
Right.
I guess like,
I think it can probably imitate self-reflection
uh-huh.
if you plugged into its data system human discussions,
Mhm.
but it would be imitation.
Yeah.
This is what you're supposed to say in this situation.
Yeah.
I think it'd be very persuasive imitatively.
Yeah, but it couldn't be like humans thinks of their own experience and say, my understanding is this,
Yes.
and then go from
It
there.
doesn't have the particularity that comes from our biology,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
comes from our body.
It's essentially everything everyone has said, but it can't actually say anything on its own.
Correct. I'm convinced of that.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's why it seems so choppy when you talk to it.
yes, and it can that can get smoother.
Yeah.
You know, many people have done the experiment of asking AI to write a poem or an essay in the style of,
Mm-hmm.
and it certainly takes the vocabulary that that person uses and the word order that that person uses, and yet the result is not that person.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there is always something missing. It's purely imitative, skillfully imitative, not skillfully, maybe the right word. Repetitively imitative.
Mm.
It can, this is the number, this is the frequency with which this person uses this word.
Mm-hmm.
And it can, figure that out with it can calculate that with stunning speed. This sort of word order that this person likes. So it can put these words in this word order.
Hmm.
Um,
How do
what
we
does that actually
avoid
accomplish?
how do we avoid some of the, I would call them mistakes, um, that people made at the invention of the automobile or the invention of the airplane or right,
Mhm.
where like when when automobiles first started, there were a lot of people who were like, oh, well, it can't run in all weather the way a horse can, or it can't,
Which was true at that time.
which was true at that time, or it can't handle muddy terrain the way a horse can, right? So there was these early naysayers, and I think this is applied to a lot of new technologies. So how can we look at the invention of any new technology, but AI certainly seems to be the technology of our current moment? How do we avoid the what seems to be clearly erroneous of saying, well, it can't do this, it can't do that? Well, maybe give it 2 or 3 iterations and it will be able to do those
Or maybe
things.
not.
Or maybe not. But how do we, on one hand, avoid that without on the but still be able to see something for what it is in the face of people on the other hand who proclaim this as the dawning of nirvana, right?
Well, we only, again, we only know what we know.
Hmm.
We know what AI can do today.
Hmm.
Now, its past history indicates an ability to increase the speed of operations exponentially.
Hmm.
Uh,
Its ability to calculate may to continue to expand.
yes.
Geometrically, I think might be the term. It's each generation is just that much more powerful in what it can
Yes.
calculate.
But power of calculation is still qualitatively different,
Uh-huh.
quantitatively vastly superior
Hmm.
to human calculation.
Hmm.
There's more to human intelligence. Again, the multifacetedness of human intelligence. there's vastly more to human intelligence than calculation.
Hmm.
So I see no reason to suppose, on the basis of its limited past, what else do we have?
Hmm.
I see no reason on the basis of its limited past to see it as able to be multifaceted
Right. Yeah, it's interesting.
or more than imitative. That is an extremely powerful tool. Now, there's the thing. Like the horse that threw my friend off, a horse is vastly more powerful than a human being physically.
Uh-huh.
And generally, human beings are able to control it, but not always.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a tool, but as it becomes more powerful, is it a tool that can be effectively controlled, not in terms of it developing a will of its own, but in terms of it actually doing what you think you told it to do?
Mm-hmm.
Is it may interpret you as it develops calculating power, it may interpret your command in ways quite different from
From what you expected.
what you expected.
Right. Launch the nukes. Wait! Shit! It's not what we meant.
And again, I keep coming back to this. So on the one hand, there's that thought that this tool, like the tool that is the horse,
Mm.
intelligent, but in a radically different way from us,
Mm-hmm.
having a very different mind from us, but a mind of its own,
Mm-hmm.
generally controllable by us, not really having a will of its own,
Mm.
mind of its own.
Mm.
It may bug us off at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Not in the pop culture sense of
Skynet.
Skynet,
Mm.
but in the sense of carrying out commands it's given.
Or creates for itself.
Yeah,
No.
carrying out commands it's given in ways that we do not anticipate.
Mm.
And then also with that, my concern that, as I say, repeating myself, it's power in somebody's hands.
Mm.
How's this power going?
That would explain why all these companies are racing so hard without pausing to think if we should be doing this, if this is the tool we want to create. Everyone's just racing for the finish line because everybody else is doing it, right?
Yes,
They see power
see power.
that they can have
They can
if they do a better job.
Of course, they're going to be entirely benign about
Right.
the use of this power. That goes without saying. Hell, we'll even hire ethicists
Right.
to advise us. That's how noble we are. We will hire Princeton ethicists
Mm.
to advise us on the proper use of AI. See how benign our intentions are.
Mm. Right, right. But yeah, now Amazon, Meta, IBM, Amazon, OpenAI, yeah,
So
ChatGPT, everyone's trying to do it.
in contrast to extraterrestrials, I am skeptic, but a empathetic skeptic.
Mm.
When it comes to AI, I'm a skeptic in the sense I don't think it'll deliver the goods people think it's going to deliver. We shall see. But I'm a skeptic, not a sympathetic skeptic.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about that historical trend. I mean, I think you and I have discussed this before in regards to antibiotics or the printing press. Like, is there a tendency when a new technology comes along to overestimate its potential
That
to
can happen
change
too.
human life?
Oh, yeah. I mean, forecasts in the 50s about life at the end of the 20th century
Hmm.
were all based on the development and expansion of nuclear energy and nuclear power.
Uh-huh.
Nuclear energy, nuclear power did not develop that way.
Uh-huh.
Forecasts in the 60s, but the end of the 20th, beginning of the 21st centuries. 2001, A Space Odyssey. We're all forecast on this rate of development in space exploration, but clearly we plateaued, or very nearly plateaued in that area. So yes, are limits that are hard to, or, you know, the basic technology of air travel, basic technology of it, yeah, the jets of the today are the jets of 1960s, 1970s. U.S. military plans to keep flying the B-52. B-52 prototype flew in 1952. U.S. military plans to keep flying the B-52 into the 2030s.
Mm-hmm.
Development of aerospace technology in some respects somewhat plateaued.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I mean, forecasting the future is a fool's enterprise anyway. But particularly when it comes to technology, new technologies arise unexpectedly sometimes. I mean, clearly, I think clearly, the dramatic expansion of communications, computer technology, dramatic, spectacular expansion of this caught the world by surprise.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, they do not, the historical record suggests, they do not move, they're not developed continually forever and ever in this direction. There are certain limitations. It's hard to say what the limitations are. But yes, it's an interesting exercise. Look at how past decades forecast the future, always based on the assumption that the technologies that were currently expanding in their day would keep expanding
At a same rate.
Again, we shall see.
We shall see.
But it's really interesting if you kind of like sci-fi, as I do. It's really kind of interesting to look at old sci-fi. We were supposed to be colonizing the moon by now and organizing Mars missions.
We've gotten distracted.
We've also just got space is a very hostile place.
Yeah.
We forgot the energy. Yeah, we forgot the energy requirements really needed.
Yes. So plateauing in one area, plateauing in a couple areas, dramatically expanding in several other areas. It's unpredictable. Certainly medical science can do things today that were quite unimaginable.
Even 30 years ago.
30 years ago.
Wow. Well, Father, we could keep you here all night picking your brain. It's always a pleasure to have you.
You're glad I made it.
No, it's wonderful. Thank you so much for coming back on the Green Dragon.
Let's do it.
Looking forward to having you back just as soon as we can.
Maybe have a fire again.
Yeah,
Yes, indeed.
totally.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.